Stephen, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Why don't
George, we're the warm-up act.
we are the warm-up act, Stephen? Well, I think today's audience is going to be very curious to hear a little bit about what you do for such a large and successful company, a global icon. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your job is and what you do at McDonald's.
Okay, so try and keep things as simple and as brief as possible. My job has responsibility for the deployment of design concepts, interior, exterior, public-facing experience concepts for McDonald's in the international markets. And when I say international markets, that means the markets that are outside of the US. So I have a colleague who is based in the US, who is my equivalent for that market, a guy called Max Carmona. And between us, we have principal responsibility for the creation of designs and solutions for implementation in the public spaces, of our restaurants, using agencies such as your own, George, but also for the benefit of others. I do have to say that, yes, there are other agencies that we work with as well. But George, let me hand back to you and say, okay, what would you like to say about yourself and about UXUS?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, well, I'm the founder and chief creative officer for UXUS. UXUS means you times us. And just like what's happening here today, we love to work collaboratively with our clients. McDonald's has been a longtime client of ours now for many years. A great pleasure to work with Stephen and his team. And like he mentioned, there are many other agencies, obviously, that work in tandem, but we enjoy working with Stephen tremendously. And that's why I wanted to invite him today to talk a little bit about the future of retail and hospitality, what it means in the post-COVID world, in particular, how digital plays into the physical space, this idea of Phygital, and what it means going forward, and how, because of COVID, things have accelerated. So I guess the first question that everybody wants to know is, like, will the behaviors of consumers shift post-COVID? What is your perspective on that, Stephen?
The very short answer would be yes, George.
I think they'd like to hear a little bit more.
No, like, where do you start with this? I mean, it is such a broad question.
Yes.
And the reason that I say that is because of the fact, just even at lunchtime today, I was watching the television and there was an announcement by Boris Johnson about plans to rebuild the UK by investing in significant infrastructure, housing, etc. projects. And I'm not here to speak about politics at all. But off the back of his announcements, he was being pushed by journalists with questions which were starting with the phrase, "Can you promise this? And can you promise that? And can you promise the next thing?" And as I say, leaving aside politics, at the moment you can't promise anything 100%. As far as the future is concerned. By simple virtue of the fact that we're still in a highly dynamic and fluid situation.
Yeah.
Again, and I'm going to try and answer your question, George, but I think we all need to recognize the reality of the situation. I was watching a documentary last night on the experiences of nurses and doctors in Cremona town in northern Italy, which was one of the first to enter into lockdown. And they were showing the horrors of what it is that people have been experiencing, as patients, but also as people working in the health service. And off the back of that, some of the closing comments, as they were starting to reopen the market again, coming from the doctors and nurses was, things are going back to normal, but at the same time we haven't solved the underlying problem here. There's still a virus at large. So anyone who says they can, confidently predict the future with any degree of granularity, I would like to give them my money for a lottery ticket. But putting all that aside, I think that trying to be pragmatic about things. I think that definitely coming off the back of this, everyone's been exposed to social distancing limitations, in some way, shape, or form. And for sure, those social distancing limitations and restrictions, are being lifted, from one country to the next. I don't think that, well, I cannot help but feel that there's going to be a lasting impact from that. There may not be social distancing restrictions in place, but I think that we're going to move to a place where there is unease amongst the population about social proximity. So people are going to be nervous, naturally coming off the back of this and going back into the the environments that they were accustomed to in the past. Again, speaking from personal experience, living in France, restaurants here, have been reopened a couple of weeks now, and going out. Yes, tables are positioned further apart in cafes and dine-in, dine-out establishments. At the same time, the number of people that are in the restaurant is not at the levels that you would normally expect at this time of year. And I think that there's a lingering nervousness at the moment, and I think that how long it takes to get over that, is going to significantly on its own play a part in how people will behave after this.
Absolutely.
It's about rebuilding confidence.
Yeah, and I mean, and to your point about rebuilding confidence, I mean, obviously digital plays a very important part in terms of that contactless way of utilizing food and beverage, shopping. I mean, generations now, cross-generationally, I think people have been forced to use digital platforms because of exactly what you're talking about, this nervousness, this inability to go out and communicate and have contact in the physical world, that digital has, because of the situation, been imposed on a group of people beyond just the digital natives that we normally talk about, the youth group. And now more than ever, people are more fluid and comfortable using digital technologies to interface with purchases or experiences. And that kind of greater acceptance across a wider group, I think, also gives companies and brands opportunities to create new types of experiences that people wouldn't normally have used in the past, simply because now they're accustomed to using these digital technologies. So I think in that way, there's been a forced adaptation to digital that has been accelerated because of COVID.
No doubt. I was reading something a couple of days ago, which reported that what had been seen was acceleration in digital adoption, 5 years acceleration of digital adoption in the space of 5 months. And it speaks volumes on its own, George, that, aside from retail, so many people are conducting business in the fashion that we're conducting it right at this moment. That was never, that was never the norm in the past. I think everyone had been speaking for years about a little bit more in the way of home working, a little bit more about using digital platforms. If there's one thing that's certain coming off the back of this, let's just say everybody who has been fortunate enough to continue working, has probably found themselves working to a greater extent from home, if originally they were office based. And that on its own has impacts. Digital is a facilitator of that. In the same way digital is a facilitator of working as much as it can be a facilitator of commerce and retail and the rest of it. Sorry, George, on you go.
No, I mean, I think that your point about that, of this kind of combination of and that's why I like the word Phygital so much as an expression of this kind of new way of handling digitized experiences, because I do think that nowadays, in particular, there's a fluidity of consumers to move from digital platforms into the physical world, and that the application of digital platforms to physical world, affects how we do everything. So business, pleasure, consumption, and that consumers, in particular, young people, are extremely fluid between the two. This idea of, that this is a digital experience and this is a physical experience, for a lot of people who are accustomed to using digital, or we'll call them the digital natives, for them, there is no boundary, that it is this kind of fluid, everything is one type of experience. And therefore, I think this idea of phygital, a word that's combining the two, is kind of a nice way to think about how this new kind of consumer behavior will affect the market.
Like this word phygital, George, I hear it, and prior to hearing the word phygital, all I had, or the first time I saw you using the word phygital, all I had in my mind was the word fidget. I'm not sure how many non-native speakers there are on the call, but for me, fidget is something, it describes a condition of not being able to sit still, because condition of jumping from this into that. And on many levels, phygital is a little bit of jumping from this to that, because it is the merging of the two things.
Absolutely. I think it allows people, and often, again, digital natives, younger people, my partner happens to be a millennial. He'll be sitting having dinner, chatting with his friend. I mean, he's sitting having dinner in a restaurant with me, chatting with his friend on, a platform. Everything for especially a certain generation, it's all the same. And I think that this COVID situation has kind of broadened that base, so that people, of older generations who maybe are not digital natives, who've grown into using digital technologies, now are more accustomed than ever to do that.
So George, next time you're having dinner with them, maybe you can suggest that he stops fidgeting.
I try to do that, and it's like there's no point, because it's actually not even rude, because his friends are also doing it as well. I'm the rude one who happens to be present, and not engaging.
No, but bringing things back, the piece. There's no doubt there's going to be a change. That's the only thing that that can be promised. Tomorrow is going to be different from today, which is going to be different from yesterday. But also we need to recognize that a lot of what it is that we see is going to be driven by what happens in broader society. I mean, what happens when people truly go back to using public transport again, at volumes. Mm-hmm. What happens when there are major public events, allowed again? Mm-hmm. What's going to be the outcome from schools resuming? The schools started back in France a week past yesterday. Yeah. Now, admittedly, a very short period before shutting it down again for summer holidays. But schools went back in France last week. What's going to be the outcome from that over the longer term? Playgrounds as well. For kids. All of these things are going to feed into, let's just say, the way retail has to work, the way that we live our lives, and. Yep. Again, without getting too off track, I mean, I think that one thing that the whole experience here has shown is how closely interconnected all of the pieces of society actually are, and how actually well oiled a machine it was that we were actually living in on many levels, despite all the faults. When kids can't go to school, it has an effect. When we have challenge as far as occupancy of public transport, it has an effect. So everywhere you look, there are societal things that are going to affect. There are behavioral things. There can be regulatory things, off the back of it as well. And by regulation, we should not lose sight of the fact that at the heart of all of this, truly, there's a virus, and off the back of the virus, it means that hygiene and safety has got to be top of the agenda, for everyone. And I can't help but feel that after such a public health scare on a global level, we will see regulation dictating, changes as far as hygiene is concerned. Maybe not just as far as personal hygiene is concerned, but potentially for like food hygiene. Goodness knows what. I think that the fallout from a regulation side of things, not necessarily, I don't mean the fallout, the results or the outcomes, from a public health and regulatory side of things, could be equally as significant. So
I think you bring up a very good point of the idea of companies being transparent and giving that confidence back to the consumer. This idea that health and safety and hygiene play a very critical role. Again, this idea of transparency was already starting prior to the COVID situation. There were a lot of companies who were talking about their profit margins on products that people could buy online and all kinds of things. And now I think in particular, this idea of companies being able to show their customers, how safe their products are, and more importantly, in the world of food and beverage, that the hygiene aspect is, of the highest standard. I think definitely those are going to be huge changes that we're going to see in terms of impact on the market. How do you think this is going to impact the market, Stephen? What, like in particular for McDonald's, what sort of things do you see happening there? Obviously, you're one of the leaders in digital ordering systems. So, maybe we can talk a little bit about this idea of cashless transactions and how they are going forward.
Like, okay, a couple of things coming off the back of that. Obviously, off the back of everything that's been happening here, one of the streams, one of the channels, that we are serving, has obviously served as great benefit, most specifically drive-through. The fact that we have got drive-through there as a channel has allowed us to perform where others have been unable to perform. Now, by its nature, perhaps at the beginning, digital drive-through was perhaps more of a low-tech digital experience where you were speaking to somebody through a speaker post. But off the back of that, it obviously allows a degree of physical separation. Now, yes, we're adding more technology in the way of digital menu boards into drive-throughs, etc. But at the foundation, drive-through has been great for us as a business. Back in 2017, we started a more concerted journey as far as delivery is concerned. We had been operating what we called McDonald's delivery service in a number of markets for a number of years. And at the start of 2017, we opened the door and started working with third-party operators in terms of affording our food offering through their platforms. And quite frankly, again, an even more digital experience than we were accustomed to in the past. One that's perhaps even more contactless, and one that off the back of this, when people are self-isolating at home, gives them an opportunity to access our offering. Within the restaurant environment itself, over the years, I'm sure in common with every other business, we have seen rise in contactless payment methodology, and with us, we've seen the same as well, and that has obviously continued through the COVID scenario. And one of the other things, in the equation, and it's a question that comes by quite a lot, was we were probably one of the first QSR brands to go seriously after self-order kiosks as a means of ordering, in the restaurant. And one of the common questions that comes around, or common presumptions that goes around at the moment, is that this pandemic is going to be the death knell for self-order kiosks. And going back, I can't read tea leaves, but what I can say is that what we have seen in some markets is, in terms of the percentage of transactions taking place in the restaurant, we have seen in percentage terms a number of orders being placed on kiosk increasing compared to those being placed at front counter. Now, for many people, that's obviously a surprise because this, well, like, how can that be? But you know, when you analyze it going, you know, from the other side of things, and obviously you try to anticipate what customers are thinking in leading them to act the way that they're acting. You know, there can be a couple of things on that. One, it could be that at some level, a customer is more comfortable to place an order on a kiosk than placing an order face-to-face with a person, because it could be perceived that there's a greater risk of the person being infected than perhaps a kiosk screen, particularly if you're taking care to have a strong regime in place as far as cleaning is concerned. The other piece of the equation is that, like, typically we've been placing kiosks away from the counter area, you know, which can conceivably mean that when they're removed from the counter area, you're not surrounded by as many people in the overall ordering process. You know, when we first introduced kiosks, like we started in Europe with kiosks in France, actually, around about 2005. And over the years, you know, starting from there, they were deployed in other markets. And at certain points, you know, people were saying, you know, at a certain point, these things are going to replace kiosks. You know, back as far as 2010, you know, questions were like being asked, why should we invest in kiosks when everyone's going to move to digital? We would not have had the uptick in terms of digital engagement that we have seen overall if we hadn't had kiosks. Now, you can then analyze, why would that be the case at McDonald's? Is that different from other retailers? You know, I would say that one of our reputations, George, like, has obviously been over the years for offering speed and convenience.
Yeah.
You know, is it, apart from perhaps being more convenient, at a certain point you need to stop to use that, unless you're always ordering on favorites. You know, so if you're going to the restaurant, at a certain point you need to perform the action. And I do think that for some people, like, and I again, I can only anticipate and not speak with factual certainty. But for a number of people, they might say, you know what, it's just as easy to go to McDonald's, place an order on the screen, and then go and enjoy table service, as opposed to putting something else into the equation that can just as readily be done by the time I get to the store.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is a really great example of this Phygital experience, right? It's a combination of the two things, both the physical in-restaurant experience in addition to this digital component. I totally get why someone would be more comfortable ordering on a kiosk, because it's easy just to do hand sanitizer after you've touched the screen versus standing in front of someone who may contaminate you. Not that any of the workers at McDonald's, any of the service people at McDonald's would be sick, but you know, there is that, when you are feeling insecure, any amount of kind of distancing feels better. So that would make a lot of sense.
Sorry, George, just coming back to one point there, like you mentioned about the staff and in our language, you know, the crew that are working in the restaurant.
Yeah.
This is one thing that we must not lose sight of. That's one group we cannot afford to lose sight of, you know, in this whole equation, because, you know, hygiene and safety for customers has got to play across to staff as well.
Absolutely.
And also, you know, at the foundation of any experience that it is that I think that you're delivering for the customer, it's got to be convenient and easy and experiential for them. But on the other hand, for the staff member, it's got to be convenient and easy for them too. You know, so I think that we always need to look at the business from both sides of the equation. What it is that we are doing to serve the customer, and what it is that the customer's expectations are, and trying to find the way within each of the business to marry those things.
I think that's a very key insight that you just brought up, that potentially other sectors don't pay as much attention to. You know, the actual employee of the company and how they service the customer is as important as the service itself and the consumer interface. Their well-being, the personnel of the company, their well-being is directly related to the well-being of the company itself. So I think that's a very good point. How do you feel about what is happening in terms of the environment, the interior environment of restaurants going forward, how COVID will affect, at least right now temporarily, obviously once this pandemic is over, quote unquote, obviously things will change again, but for now, what do you see as being one of the key aspects of interiors for restaurants and potentially retail stores?
I think occupancy levels is probably one of the ones that's top of like many people's minds on this. Like nobody knows, the answers to so many questions. And I think like everyone else, we're trying to make sure that we take the best insight and in every situation, apply regulations that are in place, in the different markets that it is that we're operating in. I go back to occupancy levels because no matter which way you look at it, it has an effect, on, for us, our dining areas and the number of people that we're able to accommodate. Beyond that, you sort of say, okay, beyond distancing, you get into, discussions about like, what about the ventilation rates in the place? What about like, the touch surfaces? What about, communication of like, what it is you're doing to guests? Those kind of things need to be played out in the environment. But at the end, the steps that need to be taken are really going to have to be there to like protect people from one another. That's where fundamentally we've all got to focus. And
I know.
Just for example, I'm going to pick up on one, George.
Okay.
Maybe like a few people on the call have had some similar experiences to me, which is over recent months, one of the groups that's been knocking at my doors more frequently have been people who are selling like antimicrobial products, and off the back of that, you say to yourself, okay, by the very wording of it, you say to yourself, it's an opportunity to go after. I think that yes, there are opportunities there, but what needs to be recognized before jumping to conclusions too quickly is that an antimicrobial surface does not remove the need to keep that surface clean. So for example, and I'm just playing it out because like it was a personal experience, if you have a soiled finger and it touches any surface, antimicrobial products do not kill on contact. So at a certain point, whatever it is that's there, it does like carry risk. So that's where at the moment, in terms of the way that we play out, things within our dining areas and within the broader retail space, the guidance coming from everywhere has got to relate to like keeping yourself clean, washing your hands, and keeping a respectful distance from other people. And in the physical space, that's going to like those are going to be the impacts on dining areas. Now, how they transcend over time, I think in large part will be through seeing how people react to those dynamics. But also, there is a piece that you sort of say at a certain point, maybe some things will be driven by herd mentality. I say herd mentality.
Because what does that mean?
Well, it's just everyone follows like on something because you see it as something that's having to be done. And I'm just going to quote one example that I still don't understand today. Why did everyone go out and panic buy toilet rolls? I still don't know. But something like that can come along, and then suddenly, the whole industry, has to react to it.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, I mean, I think that that's a really good point that you bring up, is that emotional aspect, right? So the irrational kind of emotive aspect of the experience. And, what does that mean? How does a brand then give either a connection to the customer on that emotional level or reassure them emotionally? Because I don't think people rationally look at scientific facts when they go into a restaurant, when they want to, order something. They feel when something is not right. They have emotional insecurities if something doesn't, in the environment isn't aligned to their expectation.
Yeah, but George, I also think that we're going to see differences playing out across different countries. In the same way, like just even within a European context, it can be quite interesting to see, the reactions of, for example, people in Germany versus the reaction of people in countries with a higher infection rate. And that's where at the moment, like I mentioned the kiosk example a few minutes ago, and we have some markets there that are showing an increased percentage of transactions in store going through self-order kiosks.
Yeah.
Similarly, because we're like in many cases like opening dining areas again, there can be some markets where the reaction could be like different. And so at the moment, because of the fact that there have been different impacts, like in different countries, I think that we're going to see different reactions off the back of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great insight, that the cultural context of the experience of how COVID was handled in each country or the level of infection for each country will play a big role in how those people behave. I noticed here, even in Amsterdam, where I live, that here in Holland, there is no requirement to wear face masks in public. They do require the social distancing, but what I did notice is that any Italian visitor that we do have here often is wearing a mask, regardless if no one around them is. Yeah. And I think it's because of the severity, obviously, of the situation in Italy and how dire it was there in the beginning of the pandemic. So I think psychologically, these Italians just in their mind, yes, wear a mask. It's very important. Yeah. Going back to the whole, aspect of what the market is doing. I mean, how do you think that Phygital will help brands survive and flourish after this post-COVID? I mean, what do you think that that the aspect of kind of integrating digital now in a meaningful way for the first time across the entire group of society? How do you think that's going to help brands?
I think it's going to help brands because of the fact fundamentally that channel is more contactless. Okay, so that's the reality of it. Back to the comment I made a few minutes ago. Increasing distances between people, and higher levels of hygiene are broadly quoted as being the things that will get us out of this. Digital experiences by their nature offer like a greater separation of people, and off the back of that, like that can certainly help. But I want to reinforce, again, a point that I made a bit before, which is that the convenience piece of the equation has got to be supported both by the digital experience and by the experience that is being offered by the company. The two must coexist. You cannot have a convenient experience for one group without it being convenient for the others.
And that is a really good point. So I think that a big question out there right now that a lot of people are wondering about is how do we get people back? There's a lot of digital sales right now happening. I mean, even, you're talking about how McDonald's, the drive-through experience has really grown tremendously over the past few months. How do you think we're going to get people back into spaces? What do you think we will need to do? I mean, you mentioned earlier working remotely. That is going to open up a lot of spaces that used to be full of employees. Now they're going to be empty office buildings everywhere. There's going to be a lot of people who are now accustomed to not shopping physically in a retail store or not going to a restaurant, having home delivery or pickup. what do you think brands need to do to attract consumers back into those spaces? Or do you think they need to? Maybe those spaces don't need to exist anymore, or they need to become something else?
That's like the $64 million question, isn't it?
I've got 64 million right here waiting for you, Stephen.
Maybe it's just me. But I'm sure that there will be others too. The piece about social activity, and sociable ventures, is important.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that when you pare everything back, and again, sorry, I'm speaking more about things from my perspective than perhaps broader retail's perspective. But eating together is something that has been a social event since we emerged from caves, right? So one way or another, I cannot help but feel that is there to be sustained. How do you encourage people, to do it, away from home? That's going to be the big, challenge for everyone. Yeah. And you can say, okay, delivery plays a role, and drive-through plays a role. So to your point, how do you get people back into the restaurants again? How do you get people back into shops again? I think that for the time being, we need to be watching out for our guests. We need to be communicating to them what it is that we're doing. But as importantly, doing what we say we're going to be doing, in order to look after them. I think that to encourage people in, hospitality is going to be perhaps more important, than it's ever been. And, maybe not just hospitality at the the first level, maybe the role of hospitality has to evolve a bit, as opposed to.
I think what you're saying, Stephen, is incredibly relevant. I mean, I think, especially even for retail, it's a social activity when you're talking about going shopping in a physical space. I mean, anyone can order anything, anywhere, anytime, like you were saying, the phone, this is my everywhere store, right? And my everywhere restaurant. Yeah. So, why the physical space? And I think that there's a natural proclivity for people to come together in social groups and participate with each other in experiences, whether it's dining or shopping or whatever it might be. And I think that we need to really encourage the sense of community in those spaces and design and build spaces that help facilitate those social interactions in a safe way. We have a couple of questions that have come up. Will the pandemic accelerate rollout of McDonald's to-go format as seen in Fleet Street, London?
Okay, I can answer that one. Watch this space. And the reason that I say that is, we opened that outlet on the 30th of July last year. It was at the location, of a previous McDonald's, and we were looking at this concept of, to go with, let's just say, kiosk orientated ordering. I think it's a very interesting question, and I can't actually answer the question 100%, because let's just say there's two pieces to the puzzle there. On the one hand, one can presume that something like that, off the back of the pandemic, would be a beneficial platform to go after. On the other hand, and this is something that is related to our business model, we need to make sure that we're able to serve customers at mass. Okay, we need a significant throughput of customers, because the per unit profit is not so great. And so that's where a small unit that does not accommodate a significant number of people could be the flip side of the coin. And so that's where, again, there are two pieces, to the equation here. One, the presumption, more contactless, more to go, and therefore, let's just say, more becoming to customers. On the other hand, the reality, of what it is that we need to do to sustain our business model. I see there's another question.
We are being asked to wrap up, so it looks like we have 2 more minutes. Stephen, I want to thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Insightful and inspiring as ever. If anyone wants to reach UXUS, please go to uxus.com, UXUS.com, and there's an info email there if you need to reach me for whatever reason. I'm also on Instagram, George _Gottl. So you can also send me a direct message through Instagram if anyone has any more questions. Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close the session?
No, I mean, George, thank you very much for the conversation. It's been good fun.
It's a pleasure as always, Stephen.
Yeah. I'm going to keep that word Phygital in my head.
Okay, well, I disagree with your wife. I do think you look like George Clooney on the screen.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate everybody attending today, and I hope you found it exciting and insightful.
Yeah. Okay, thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Stephen.
Cheers.